Hi, it's Dr. Fox, and in this video, what we're going to talk about is that first depressive episode, or perhaps the first emergence of those depressive symptoms. Now, we're going to talk about the insidious start, the intrusive symptoms and possible causes, and how just it's not all the same for everybody, but also ways of maybe not knowing yourself and some uncertainty with those symptoms. And then lastly, what are some treatment options and how you can go about getting help? So please like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and let's get into it. So first, let's talk about the insidious start. So what typically happens is that first depressive episode, it doesn't immediately occur. It's not all of a sudden, it's like, bam, I feel this sense of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, this sense of chronic negative outlook, and all of these other facets. I'm not going to break down all those symptoms because there's tons of videos on that. I even have videos on that, things like that. What I want to talk about is that first depressive episode experience. And what happens is it's typically very insidious. And what that means is these symptoms, they kind of start small and they continue to grow and they weave their way, right? Like a snake wrapping around something. And it's really slow and really careful. And it wraps around slowly, and it builds and it builds. And a lot of times, initially, a lot of us are pushing it away, right? When it's small, we're like, you know what? I have this negative outlook. Maybe it's not working. Maybe I feel hopeless about a relationship or hopeless about my job prospects or going to school or belief in myself, things like that. And they don't start out like one and it just magically continues. When it first starts, it's intermittent. It's like that snake starts to wrap up and then it's like, maybe I won't. And then it goes a little more and maybe it pulls back. And what happens is that it goes away for a short period of time, comes back, stays a little longer, goes away for a little while, starts to come back. And it's this intermittent growth that makes it so insidious. And each time, perhaps, a new symptom emerges and it's more intense. And it feels as though it holds you a little deeper. It holds you a little tighter. And it's wrapped around. And it's even harder. So it's an insidious build. It's not boom, that falling off a cliff and all of a sudden, pop. Oh, it's a major depressive episode and here you are and things like that. So it's so important to know that insidious build. Where did it start? Building that insight is really, really critical. When we talk about the intensive symptoms and the possible causes, is that we have to look back. We have to explore, where did these things start? What's the foundation for these things? What were the beliefs around them? Who is in our interpersonal circle, perhaps who supported them? The depressive beliefs and the depressive behavior where we're staying in bed too long or we're isolating ourselves and people aren't encouraging us to go out or engage and things like that. So what are some of those things? Was it initially a belief about yourself? Was it about your prospects? Was it about things that you're able to do, your sense of efficacy? So where did they start? And those intensive symptoms, looking back as to where they started, is critical. Because if you recognize when they were small, then we can say, okay, what kept them from being this massive, massive impact, like an asteroid hurling towards Earth, right? It's this giant asteroid. It's like, what prevented that? How did it get small? And how did you manage it? Because it was intermittent initially. So what kind of things were you doing that was pushing back? And those are the types of behaviors typically individuals stop engaging in that allows it to grow because it comes back, just as I mentioned a moment ago, comes back, right? Then it dissipates, it comes back a little longer, a little more intense, dissipates, so on and so forth. So we have to go back and look at those things and focus on those things because those are typically the patterns and beliefs and adaptive behaviors that you were engaged in that worked. It worked for you because it's not all the same. That's also important to remember. Not all depression is hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, is negative outlook, things like that. Different symptoms that make up your depression is going to be different for you than it is for someone else. So someone else who experiences depression is going to be like, no, that's not how it works. Well, hang on a minute, because it's different for everybody. It manifests differently. Now, culture is a huge aspect of that. Social support, huge aspect. Personal resources, the things you say to yourself, your perspective on life, the people around you. These are all variables that contribute to you experiencing your depression. Depression is very personalized. That's why all medications don't work the same. That's why all therapeutic approaches don't work the same. That's why, there's all these different therapists and approaches and medications and workbooks and different types of books and things that you can do, because we're trying to catch all of those variations. But what happens is when you're depressed, particularly when you fall into a major depressive episode, for your first time, first of all, it scares the bejesus out of you and everybody who loves and cares about you, because everybody's like, oh my God. But there's this false belief that we create our own mental health symptoms, and that is a huge fallacy, that you can just think differently and it goes away. It doesn't really work that way. You know it, I know it, and a lot of other people know it too. But there's also a lot of people who believe that it's, you just kind of, you just wipe it away, right? It's like, you're holding on to all these balloons and then, you want to get rid of it. Well, they're filled with helium, just let them go. And then they'll all just float away and you won't have to worry about it anymore. Doesn't really work that way. Just as I mentioned, that there are components which it comes into your life, grows, into your life, grows, it goes out of your life, so on and so forth. So it adds to these things, that adds to the uniqueness of the depression. And that's why knowing yourself is the other component, is that you have to know yourself, know your culture, know who's supportive, know the positive aspects of yourself as well as the negative. The more you know yourself and you know where your depression began, that you're better able to deal with it. And I understand that it is frightening. It's frightening for everybody. And it's really scary to see someone who you love and care about, all of a sudden they're secluding themselves. All of a sudden they're saying negative things about themselves, about how they believe that their future is so negative and dark and empty and lonely and all these other really adverse, frightening, dark thoughts and perspectives of themselves and their life. And it's really scary. And it's about knowing yourself. It's understanding who you are, understanding your culture. And that helps you, believe it or not, grow and develop. And it's not like you can suddenly, I'm thinking depressive thoughts. Boom, let me think happy thoughts. Oh, okay, happy thoughts, great. Now everything's great. It doesn't work that way. It's a process. And that's why therapy usually isn't, one and done. That'd be great if it was one and done, but it's not. It's a process. And because it's very individualized, the depression, so is treatment. And treatment length can go for years, but sometimes it can go for weeks or months. So it depends upon the severity. Now, when we talk about treatment options, so let's talk about that. So what options are there? Just as I mentioned, there's medication. Now, what's important to know about medication is that medication isn't going to magically, it's not like a genie comes out of the bottle, right? You open the bottle, right, for the medication, and here comes the genie, and the genie's like, oh, you're depressed? Now you're not. Great. But what happens is, because of the buildup that I talked about a moment ago, that insidious build, because of the individualized components of the depression, that all medication is not going to make it magically go away, because did you have the skills initially to deal with this? Some do, some don't. Are these beliefs that you have, are they long-standing, such as in your family, the people that were closest to you, or the people that you admire and look up to? Do they say a lot of negative things? Are they really critical? Do your parents, for example, do they parent backwards? Parenting backwards is that they point out the negative in your failures because they're hoping that you will miraculously hear this and be like, well, by golly, then I am not going to do that. I'm going to rise above it. That's not how people work. When you continually push people down, what they do eventually, 95% of them, they just kind of start laying down. When you degrade them, they start to feel degraded and small and broken. And that gives depression an opportunity to sneak in. So medication doesn't magically, boop, you pop it and you pop this pill and then ta-da, it's gone, right? That genie came out, popped, done. It doesn't work that way. So that's why, and the research has shown this for over 60 years, that medication with therapy is efficacious. But interestingly, therapy on its own, for some, remember that there's variations. Therapy on its own is more advantageous and impactful than medication. So therapy is a critical component. Obviously, I firmly believe that, but the research supports that for over 60 years. I'm not even 60 years old yet, so even before I was born. I'm not 60 years old. That's true. Don't believe that. So what's important, though, is what fits So when we talk about like therapeutic approaches, there's CBT, that's really popular. There's different types of CBT. There is interpersonal, that's what I use a lot of. There's also object relations, I also use parts of that. There's some CBT and I use parts of that as well. So a lot of other therapists, other my colleagues, things like that, we use a very eclectic approach because the idea of that eclectic approach is being able to model or sculpt our approach to the individual, because we know that depression, that first depressive episode, can be really frightening and you become really scared of what can help you. And are there any options? Am I going to feel this way forever? Am I totally stuck? You're not totally stuck. There's a lot of good therapists that are out there. You just have to find one that you connect with. First session, maybe give that person a break. And by the third session, you're usually like, yeah, this is a therapist that I can relate to and connect with, and then therapy can go forward. Or you might be like, you know what, this isn't working out and I want to try somebody else. But the important thing is, and maybe all you need is a workbook. And by all you need, that doesn't mean like, oh, it's less than. I mean, I'm a big believer in workbooks. If you look at my website, you'll see that. But that sometimes, people, they don't want to go and talk to somebody. They want to be able to learn their strategies, apply their strategies, and work through it on their own. That's totally fine. That's what those self-help books are for. And building that insight, doing it yourself. There's all these different approaches. The whole point of this is you can get help. There are resources out there that can help you. And you can manage your depression. And the first depressive episode is so scary, and I totally understand that. But learning those strategies, the earlier you learn them, the more critical it is. And that decreases the likelihood of the severity as well as the reoccurrence of future depressive episodes. And that's what we're working for. So I hope this was helpful for you. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.